Christopher Nolan is an extraordinarily talented filmmaker, and I believe he's a key example of auteur theory because he's heavily involved in all stages of the creative process, and I believe that he leaves a distinct style on each of his projects. I'm going to be looking primarily at Dunkirk, Memento, and Inception, with a little bit of the Dark Knight trilogy and Interstellar as well. Nolan brings key thematic and cinematic elements to each of his works, namely those being the idea of time, playing around with the concept of time and the way our characters perceive time. We usually experience a protagonist engaging in some sort of self-deception, usually related to their struggle between a subjective reality or their own narrative and the objective reality or the truth. And that dichotomy usually forces the audience into the role of detective, where, similar to having an unreliable narrator, the audience is forced to do a little bit more critical thinking. A great example of nonlinear storytelling is evident in Dunkirk, where the story is actually split across 3 different timelines, each on their own time frame as well. There's the land, sea, and air, those taking place over a week, day, and hour respectively. And with extensive use of cross-cutting, Nolan is able to simultaneously give us information about the other 2 timelines without letting us know if the people we're rooting for are okay, or if they're going to survive this fresh new disaster that we know they're about to face. Inception has a lot of examples of the way that Nolan likes to play around with time to give the audience a unique experience. Nolan has said that he wants the audience to be in the maze with the characters, taking the wrong turns, and he didn't want them to feel like they were above the maze, knowing what was right or wrong. At certain points during Inception, we're going to be operating with as many as 5 different timelines or levels of the dream. So obviously that can be a lot to keep track of. But Nolan does an excellent job using the music as a recurring motif to remind the audience and the characters that, hey, there's other things going on here that you're not necessarily experiencing. How far has the van fallen? How much time does Arthur have to set up the fall for the elevator shaft? But for the most part, these dream sequences are shown in a somewhat linear order. I think the most disjointed part about Inception, other than the foreshadowing early on, is the story between Mal and Cobb, because we don't even really have the full timeline until it's already the climax of the film, and we're sort of getting these breadcrumbs throughout the film that are sort of leading the audience to question Cobb's perception of reality, whether we as the audience can believe in the subjective narrative that he's created for himself to be happy. Right at the end of the film, we see him choose to entirely abandon his totem, which is his reference on reality, because he just wants to be happy and he just wants to be with his kids again. So the audience is put into the role of detective, having to decide for themselves whether or not this is Cobb's reality, and kind of asking whether or not that matters as long as he's at peace. Memento has to be the shining example of a Nolan film that thrusts the audience into the role of detective, with what Nolan describes as a hairpin plot structure. The audience is thrust into Leonard's shoes, dealing with his condition.
Well, that's the thing. I have this condition.
A condition?
It's my memory.
Amnesia.
No. It's different from that. I have no short-term memory. I know who I am. I know all about myself. Since my injury, I can't make new memories.
And so because he has no short-term memory, he walks into each one of these scenes with no clue who these people are and what context it has towards him. Same as the audience, because of this unique plot structure, where there are essentially 2 timelines. One in black and white that is progressing chronologically forward, and one in color that is progressing chronologically backwards. And so these 2 timelines meet up at what would be the middle of the whole story, but is the end of the film. With the black and white scenes, we are seeing, it's at least being presented to us as a more factual statement of the past and a more third-party view of Leonard. versus in color we're getting his internal thoughts, fears, anxieties, and more subjective view of Leonard. But as the film progresses, those two roles start to switch and merge together just as the two timelines do.
So you lie to yourself to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that.
So a lot like Inception, Leonard is going to lie to himself to be happy, but it's in a lot less of a peaceful way than in Inception, where he literally engineers a way to use his condition against himself to ensure that he'll take out any context of this murderous lifestyle he's been living. And with Dunkirk, there is no direct lie, but our characters are in such a desperate place that they're almost deceiving themselves into thinking that there's somewhere safe to go, that there is some respite from their current situation. So the audience isn't playing detective as much as being critical of some of the escape plans that our protagonists are going to come up with. When a bunch of them decide to go take shelter in an abandoned ship, the audience, I think, is supposed to kind of think, I'm not sure if this is going to work out. The last stylistic tendency I wanted to cover is Nolan's use of lighting, specifically as it relates to inserts or small props. But you'll see it a lot that he'll like to light up half of his actors' faces, especially in scenes where there's not a lot of dialogue. And you'll see something very similar with the inserts where you'll sort of have a light and dark half of the prop. And he'll use these inserts as a motif to reference a key theme within the film. The totems in Inception are a great example. Every time we see our characters take these out, we know that our characters are thinking about their reality, and so it's blinking light to the audience that we should consider that as well. It's very similar in Memento, especially because we are getting a lot of our information through Leonard's own note-keeping, especially with his Polaroids, and so when he goes and doctors that information, he's actually doctoring the information that we're going to get. And so whenever we see these Polaroids come out, it's blinking red light again to the audience. Hey, you need to be critical of Leonard, and you need to sort out these events for yourself because his story might not necessarily be legitimate. And one of the simplest but most elegant usage of the insert, it has to be the pamphlet in Dunkirk. 5 seconds and you understand the context of the movie immediately. It gives the audience a clear view into just how desperate the situation is, and that you're going to be watching characters pursue not victory but survival. I think it's hard to argue that Christopher Nolan is definitely an auteur. He leaves a distinctive mark across his entire body of work, and you'll see that he plays with the idea of time, usually utilizing a nonlinear story structure. He will have protagonists engage in self-deception to force the audience into the role of detective, defining objective truth from subjective reality. There's also frequent usage of harsh one-sided lighting to emphasize scenes where there's not a lot of dialogue, and you'll see those happen especially as a motif with inserts to reinforce a theme. Now, Nolan is also known for reusing actors, writers, and producers across multiple projects, and obviously Hans Zimmer has become instrumental in a lot of his works. So there's a lot of ways that I've outlined to tell if you're watching a Nolan film, but I think the best way to tell is if you're still thinking about the movie a couple days later.